Section 9 of the Works of Edgar Allan Poe, Raven Edition, Volume 5. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kevin Davidson. Why the Little Frenchman Wears His Hand in a Sling, Part 2, by Edgar Allan Poe. It was in no placid temper, I say, that the metaphysician drew up his chair to its customary station by the hearth. Many circumstances of a perplexing nature had occurred during the day to disturb the serenity of his meditations. In attempting des œufs à la princesse, he had unfortunately perpetrated an omelette à la reine. The discovery of a principle in ethics had been frustrated by the overturning of a stew. At last, not least, he had been thwarted in one of those admirable bargains which he at all times took such a special delight in bringing to a successful termination. But in the chafing of his mind at these unaccountable vicissitudes, there did not fail to be mingled some degree of that nervous anxiety which the fury of a boisterous night is so well calculated to produce. Whistling to his more immediate vicinity the large black water-dog we have spoken of before, and settling himself uneasily in his chair, he could not help casting a wary and unquiet eye toward those distant recesses of the apartment, whose inexorable shadows not even the red firelight itself could more than partially succeed in overcoming. Having completed a scrutiny whose exact purpose was perhaps unintelligible to himself, he drew close to his seat a small table covered with books and papers, and soon became absorbed in the task of retouching a voluminous manuscript intended for publication on the morrow. He had been thus occupied for some minutes when, "I am in no hurry, Monsieur Bonbon," suddenly whispered a whining voice in the apartment. "The devil!" ejaculated our hero, starting to his feet, overturning the table at his side, and staring around him in astonishment. "Very true," calmly replied the voice. "Very true? What is very true? How came you here?" vociferated the metaphysician, as his eye fell upon something which lay stretched at full length upon the bed. "I was saying," said the intruder, without attending the interrogatives, "I was saying that I am not at all pushed for time, that the business upon which I took the liberty of calling is of no pressing importance. In short, that I can very well wait until you have finished your exposition." "My exposition? There now, how do you know? How came you to understand that I was writing an exposition? Good God!" "Hush!" replied the figure in a shrill undertone, and arising quickly from the bed, he made a single step toward our hero, while an iron lamp that depended overhead swung convulsively back from his approach. The philosopher's amazement did not prevent a narrow scrutiny of the stranger's dress and appearance. The outlines of his figure, exceedingly lean, but much above the common height, were rendered minutely distinct by means of a faded suit of black cloth which fitted tight to the skin, but was otherwise cut very much in the style of a century ago. These garments had evidently been intended for a much shorter person than their present owner. His ankles and wrists were left naked for several inches. In his shoes, however, a pair of very brilliant buckles gave the lie to the extreme poverty implied by the other portions of his dress. His head was bare and entirely bald, with the exception of a hinder part, from which depended a queue of considerable length. A pair of green spectacles with side glasses protected his eyes from the influence of the light, and at the same time prevented our hero from ascertaining either their color or their conformation. About the entire person there was no evidence of a shirt, but a white cravat of filthy appearance was tied with extreme precision around the throat, and the ends, hanging down formally side by side, gave, although I dare say unintentionally, the idea of an ecclesiastic. Indeed, many other points, both in his appearance and demeanor, might have very well sustained a conception of that nature. Over his left ear he carried, after the fashion of a modern clerk, an instrument resembling the stylus of the ancients. In a breast pocket of his coat appeared conspicuously a small black volume, fastened with clasps of steel. This book, whether accidentally or not, was so turned outwardly from the person as to discover the words Rituel Catholique in white letters upon the back. Our physiognomy was interestingly saturnine, even cadaverously pale. The forehead was lofty and deeply furrowed with the ridges of contemplation. The corners of the mouth were drawn down into an expression of the most submissive humility. There was also a clasping of the hands as he stepped toward our hero, a deep sigh, and altogether a look of such utter sanctity as could not have failed to be unequivocally prepossessing. Every shadow of anger faded from the countenance of the metaphysician, as, having completed a satisfactory survey of his visitor's person, he shook him cordially by the hand and conducted him to a seat. There would, however, be a radical error in attributing this instantaneous transition of feeling in the philosopher to any one of those causes which might naturally be supposed to have had an influence. Indeed, Pierre Bon Bon, from what I have been able to understand of his disposition, was of all men the least likely to be imposed upon by any speciousness of exterior deportment. It was impossible that so acute an observer of men and things should have failed to discover, upon the moment, the real character of the personage who had thus intruded upon his hospitality. To say no more, the conformation of the visitor's feet was sufficiently remarkable. He maintained lightly upon his head an inordinately tall hat. There was a tremendous swelling about the hinder parts of his breeches, and the vibration of his coat-tail was a palpable fact. Judge, then, with what feelings of satisfaction our hero found himself thrown thus at once into the society of a person for whom he had at all times entertained the most unqualified respect. He was, however, too much of the diplomatist to let escape from him any intimation of his suspicions in regard to the true state of affairs. It was not his cue to appear at all conscious of the high honor he thus unexpectedly enjoyed, but by leading his guest into the conversation to elicit some important ethical ideas which might, in obtaining a place in his contemplated publication, enlighten the human race, and at the same time immortalize himself, ideas which, I should have added, his visitor's great age and well-known proficiency in the science of morals might very well have enabled him to afford. Actuated by these enlightened views, our hero bade the gentleman sit down, while he himself took occasion to throw some faggots upon the fire, and place upon the now re-established table some bottles of Mousseau. Having quickly completed these operations, he drew his chair vis-à-vis to his companion's, and waited until the latter should open the conversation. But plans even the most skilfully matured are often thwarted in the outset of their application, and the restaurateur found himself nonplussed by the very first words of his visitor's speech. "I see you know me, Bon Bon," said he. "Ha, ha, ha! Eh, eh, eh! He, he, he! ho, 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 hoo, hoo, hoo. And the devil, dropping at once the sanctity of his demeanor, opened to its fullest extent a mouth from ear to ear, so as to display a set of jagged and fang-like teeth, and throwing back his head, laughed long, loudly, wickedly, and uproariously, while the black dog, crouching down upon his haunches, joined lustily in the chorus, and the tabby cat, flying off at a tangent, stood up on end and shrieked in the farthest corner of the apartment. Not so the philosopher. He was too much a man of the world either to laugh like the dog, or by shrieks to betray the indecorous trepidation of the cat. It must be confessed he felt a little astonishment to see the white letters which form the words Rituel Catholique on the book in his guest's pocket, momently changing both their color and their import, and in a few seconds, in place of the original title, the words Registre des Condamned blazed forth in characters of red. This startling circumstance, when Bon replied to his visitor's remark, imparted to his manner an air of embarrassment, which probably might not otherwise have been observed. "Why, sir," said the philosopher, "why, sir, to speak sincerely, I imagine I have some very faint idea of the remarkable honor—" "Why, yes, very well," interrupted his Majesty. "Say no more. I see how it is." And hereupon, taking off his green spectacles, he wiped the glasses carefully with the sleeve of his coat, and deposited them in his pocket. If Bon had been astonished by the incident of the book, his amazement was now much increased by the spectacle which here presented itself to view. In raising his eyes with a strong feeling of curiosity to ascertain the color of his guests, he found them by no means black as he had anticipated, nor gray as might have been imagined, nor yet hazel, nor blue, nor indeed yellow, nor red, nor purple, nor white, nor green, nor any other color in the heavens above, or in the earth beneath, or in the waters upon the earth. In short, Pierre Bon not only saw plainly that his Majesty had no eyes whatsoever, but could discover no indications of their having existed at any previous period, for the space where eyes should naturally have been was, I am constrained to say, simply a dead level of flesh. It was not in the nature of the metaphysician to forbear making some inquiry into the sources of so strange a phenomenon, and the reply of his Majesty was at once prompt, dignified, and satisfactory. "Eyes, my dear Bon, eyes, did you say? Oh, I perceive. The ridiculous prints, which are in circulation, have given you a false idea of my personal appearance. Eyes, true. Eyes, Pierre Bon, are very well in their proper place. That you would say is in the head, right? The head of a worm? To you, likewise, these optics are indispensable. Yet I will convince you that my vision is more penetrating than your own. There is a cat I can see in the corner, a pretty cat. Look at her. Observe her well. Now, Bon, do you behold the thoughts, I say, the ideas, the reflections, which are being engendered in her pericranium? There it is, now. You do not. She is thinking we admire the length of her tail and the profundity of her mind. She has just conceived that I am the most distinguished of ecclesiastics, that you are the most superficial of metaphysicians. Thus, you see, I am not altogether blind, but to one of my profession, the eyes you speak of would be merely an encumbrance, liable at any time to be put out by a toasting iron or a pitchfork. To you, I allow, these optical affairs are indispensable. Endeavor, Bon, to use them well. My vision is the soul." Hereupon the guest helped himself to the wine upon the table, and pouring out a bumper for Bon, requested him to drink it without scruple, and make himself perfectly at home. "A clever book of yours, Pierre," resumed his Majesty, tapping our friend knowingly upon the shoulder, as the latter put down his glass after a thorough compliance with his visitor's injunction. "A clever book, that of yours, upon my honor. It's a work after my own heart. Your arrangement of the matter, I think, however, might be improved, and many of your notions remind me of Aristotle. That philosopher was one of my most intimate acquaintances. I liked him as much for his terrible ill temper as for his happy knack at making a blunder. There's only one solid truth in all that he has written, and for that I gave him the hint out of pure compassion for his absurdity. I suppose, Pierre Bonbon, you very well know to what divine moral truth I am alluding?" "Cannot say that I—" "Indeed! Why, it was I who told Aristotle that by sneezing men expelled superfluous ideas through the proboscis." "Which is undoubtedly the case," said the metaphysician, while he poured out for himself another bumper of Mousseau, and offered his snuff-box to the fingers of his visitor. "There was Plato, too," continued his Majesty, modestly declining the snuff-box and the compliment it implied. "There was Plato, too, for whom I at one time felt all the affection of a friend. You knew Plato, Bonbon? Ah, no, I beg 1,000 pardons. He met me at Athens one day in the Parthenon, and told me he was distressed for an idea. I bade him write down that au nu estran alu. He said he would do so, and went home, while I stepped over to the pyramids. But my conscience smote me for having uttered a truth, even to aid a friend, and hastened back to Athens. I arrived behind the philosopher's chair as he was inditing the alu. Giving the lambda a flip with my finger, I turned it upside down, so the sentence now read, au nu esten augus, that is, you perceive the fundamental doctrines in his metaphysics. "Were you ever at Rome?" asked the restaurateur as he finished his second bottle of Mousseau, and drew from the closet a larger supply of Chambertin. "But once, Monsieur Bonbon, but once. There was a time," said the devil, as if reciting some passage from a book. "There was a time when occurred an anarchy of 5 years, during which the Republic, bereft of all its officers, had no magistracy besides the tribunes of the people, and these were not legally vested with any degree of executive power. At that time, Monsieur Bonbon, at that time only was I in Rome, and I have no earthly acquaintance, consequently, with any of its philosophy." Note 2. Il écrivait sur la philosophie, Cicero, Lucretius, Seneca, mais c'était la philosophie grecque, Condorcet. "What do you think of? What do you think of? Epicurus?" "What do I think of whom?" said the devil in astonishment. "You cannot surely mean to find any fault with Epicurus." "What do I think of Epicurus? Do you mean me, sir? I am Epicurus. I am the same philosopher who wrote each of the 300 treatises commemorated by Diogenes Laertes." "That's a lie," said the metaphysician, for the wine had gotten a little into his head. "Very well, sir. Very well, sir. Very well, indeed, sir," said his Majesty, apparently much flattered. "That's a lie," repeated the restaurateur dogmatically. "That's a lie." "Well, well, have it your own way," said the devil pacifically, and Bonbon, having beaten his Majesty at argument, thought it his duty to conclude a second bottle of Chambertin. "As I was saying," resumed the visitor, "as I was observing a little while ago, there are some very autre notions in that book of yours, Monsieur Bonbon. What, for instance, do you mean by all that humbug about the soul? Pray, sir, what is the soul?" "The soul," replied the metaphysician, referring to his manuscripts, "is undoubtedly—" "No, sir." "Indubitably—" "No, sir." "Indisputably—" "No, sir." "Evidently—" "No, sir." "Incontrovertibly—" "No, sir." "No, sir." "And beyond all question is a—" "No, sir. The soul is no such thing." Here the philosopher, looking daggers, took occasion to make an end upon the spot of his third bottle of Chambertin. "Then, pray, sir, what is it?" "That is neither here nor there, Monsieur Bonbon," replied his Majesty musingly. "I have tasted, that is to say, I have known some very bad souls, and some, too, pretty good ones." Here he smacked his lips, and having unconsciously let fall his hand upon the volume in his pocket, was seized with a violent fit of sneezing. He continued, "There was the soul of Cratinus, passable; Aristophanes, racy; Plato, exquisite, not your Plato, but Plato the comic poet. Your Plato would have turned the stomach of Cerberus. Faugh! Then let me see. There were Naevius, and Andronicus, and Plautus, and Turnetius. Then there was Lucilius, and Castulus, and Naso, and Quintus Flaccus. Oh, Quinty, as I called him when he sung A Seculaire for my amusement, while I toasted him, in pure good humor, on a fork. But they want flavor, these Romans. One fat Greek is worth a dozen of them. Besides, we'll keep, which cannot be said of a Quirite. Let us taste your Sauterne." Bonbon had by this time made up his mind to nil adamare, and endeavored to hand down the bottle in question. He was, however, conscious of a strange sound in the room, like the wagging of a tail. Of this, although extremely indecent in his Majesty, the philosopher took no notice, simply kicking the dog, and requesting him to be quiet. The visitor continued, "I found that Horace tasted very much like Aristotle. You know, I am fond of variety. Ternetius I could not have told from Menander. Naso, to my astonishment, was Nisander in disguise. Virgilius had a strong twang of Theocritus. Martial put me much in mind of Archilochus, and Titus Livius was positively Polybius, and none other." Here replied Bonbon, and his Majesty proceeded. "But if I have a penchant, Monsieur Bonbon, if I have a penchant, it is for a philosopher. Yet let me tell you, sir, it is not every it is not every gentleman who knows how to choose a philosopher. Long ones are not good, and the best, if not carefully shelled, are apt to be a little rancid on account of the gall." "Shelled?" Taken out of the carcass. "What do you think of a physician?" "Don't mention them. Ugh, ugh, ugh." Here his Majesty retched violently. "I never tasted but one. That rascal Hippocrates smelt of asafoetida. Ugh, ugh, ugh. Caught me a wretched cold washing him in the Styx, and after all he gave me the cholera morbus." "The wretch!" ejaculated Bonbon. "The absorption of a pill-box!" And the philosopher dropped a tear. "After all," continued the visitor, "after all, if a gentleman wishes to live, he must have more talents than one or two, and with us a fat face is an evidence of diplomacy." "How so?" "Why, we are sometimes exceedingly pushed for provisions. You must know that in a climate so sultry as mine, it is frequently impossible to keep a spirit alive for more than 2 or 3 hours. And after death, unless picked immediately, and a pickled spirit is not good, they will smell, you understand, eh? Putrefaction is always to be apprehended when the souls are consigned to us in the usual way." "Hiccup! Hiccup! Good God, how do you manage?" Here the iron lamp commenced swinging with redoubled vigor, and the devil half started from his seat. However, with a slight sigh, he recovered his composure, merely saying to our hero in a low tone, "I tell you what, Pierre Bonbon, we must have no more swearing." The host swallowed another bumper, by the way of denoting thorough comprehension and acquiescence, and the visitor continued, "Why, there are several ways of managing. The most of us starve. Some put up with the pickle. For my part, I purchase my spirits vivente corpore, in which case I find the keep very well." "But the body—" "The body. The body. The body. Well, what of the body?" I perceive. Why, sir, the body is not at all affected by the transaction. I have made innumerable purchases of the kind in my day, and the parties never experienced any inconvenience. There were Cain, and Nimrod, and Nero, and Caligula, and Dionysus, and Pisistratus, and 1,000 others, who never knew what it was to have a soul during the latter part of their lives. Yet, sir, these men adorned society. Why possession of his faculties, mental and corporeal? Who writes a keener epigram? Who reasons more wittily? But stay, I have his agreement in my pocket-book." Thus saying, he produced a red leather wallet, and took from it a number of papers. Upon some of these Bon Bon caught a glimpse of the letters Machi, Maza, Robespierre, with the words Caligula, George, Elizabeth. His Majesty selected a narrow slip of parchment, and from it read aloud the following words: "In consideration of certain mental endowments, which it is unnecessary to specify, and in further consideration of 1,000 louis d'or, I, being aged 1 year and 1 month, do hereby make over to the bearer of this agreement all my right, title, and appurtenance, in the shadow called my soul. Signed, A." Note 4. Kier Arouet. Here His Majesty repeated a name which I did not feel justified in indicating more unequivocally. "A clever fellow that," resumed he, "but like you, Monsieur Bon Bon, he was mistaken about the soul. The soul a shadow, truly. The soul a shadow? Ha, ha, ha! He, hoo, hoo, hoo! Only think of a fricasseed shadow!" "Only think of a fricasseed shadow!" exclaimed our hero, whose faculties were becoming much illuminated by the profundity of His Majesty's discourse. "Only think of a fricasseed shadow! Now, damn, humph, if I would have been such a nincompoop! My soul, Mr. Your soul, Monsieur Bon Bon?" "Yes, sir, my soul is—" "What, sir? No shadow, damn?" "Did you mean to say—" "Yes, sir, my soul is—" "Humph, yes, sir." "Did you not intend to assert—" "My soul is peculiarly qualified for a—" "What, sir?" "Stew." "Ha!" "Soufflé." "Fricassee." "Indeed." "Ragout and fricandeau. And see here, my good fellow, I let you have it. A bargain." Here the philosopher slapped His Majesty upon the back. "Couldn't think of any such thing," said the latter calmly, at the same time rising from his seat. The metaphysician stared. "Am supplied at present," said His Majesty. Said the philosopher. "Have no funds on hand." "What?" "Besides, very unhandsome in me, sir, to take advantage of your present disgusting and ungentlemanly situation." Here the visitor bowed and withdrew. In what manner could not be precisely ascertained, but in a well-concerted effort to discharge a bottle at the villain, the slender chain was severed that depended from the ceiling, and the metaphysician prostrated by the downfall of the lamp. End of section 9. Recording by Kevin Davidson. www.blogordie.com